bailing in the banks. Let's have a look. Good morning everyone, Florian Heise, and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I've got my morning stein of coffee, and I thought today we'd start the day by having a look at just the idea of bailing in for the banks. Now, we've all heard of bailouts. What about bail-ins? And it has happened. It has happened before, and it's on the forefront of everyone's concern, particularly because of the $10,000 cash spending limit and how everyone is the legislation that's proposing it, that they're trying to push through, and how that will essentially lock everyone to do transactions through the banking system. And I thought it's about time to have a look, just to get a bit of an overview of what a bail-in actually is. So this is the definition from Investopia, and we'll go through that today to have a look at it. So a bail-in. What is a bail-in? A bail-in provides relief to a financial institution on the brink of failure by requiring the cancellation of debts owed to creditors and depositors. A bail-in is the opposite of a bailout, which involves the rescue of a financial institution by external parties, typically governments, using taxpayers' money for funding. Bailouts help to keep creditors from losses, while bail-ins mandate creditors take losses. So really, you have to realize that every deposit and bit of money you've got sitting in the bank, you're essentially lending it to the bank, and it's at risk. It's at risk. Even we've got legal processes and all these things in place to kind of protect the average person, but fundamentally it's at risk if it all falls down. And maybe that's a bit of a shock to some people, and it really it highlights how much our monetary system is manipulated and how much of our market is just restricted and manipulated, even at higher levels. And it's interesting the more you understand it. Sadly, so many people just wouldn't even question what's considered normal and look at alternative strategies, that it's really hard to have conversations about these type of things. So understanding bail-in. Bail-ins and bailouts arise out of necessity rather than choice. Really, I think that's a weighted position. Both offer options for helping institutions in a crisis. Bailouts were a powerful tool in 2008 financial crisis, but bail-ins have their place as well. Notice this, how they, a necessity, because it's the whole argument of too big to fail. Too big to fail. And I understand the CEC are looking at trying to break up the banks so we don't have this issue here in Australia. The problem is, you're not letting the market self-regulate. And what happens when you don't let the pressure of a system get out? It'll just build and build and build, and then it'll blow up. So investors and deposit holders in a troubled financial institution would prefer to keep the organization solvent rather than face the alternative of losing the full value of their investments or deposits in a crisis. Or, here's another one, or we would prefer it that the institutions that we're lending our money to or depositing our money to, the financial institutions, have risk mitigation strategies in place so they don't get to a point where they need a bail-in or a bailout. Because what returns are you getting on your deposits? And we'll look at an example of here where that's happening, a couple of percent. So, you want to look at the risk-reward ratio. It's like everything. When you're doing share trading, when you're doing, CFD, anything in the financial sector, anything in business, you look at the risk-reward ratio. I've gotten to the point when I was starting to do some, trading in crypto when it all went crazy, and I was learning all about the risk-reward. Then I started applying that same type of thinking to my architectural projects. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I've got this project here I'm putting a tender in. I'm expected to take on $500,000 worth of subconsultant liability and risk for the next 7 years for only $100,000, and I'd probably make a profit of 10-15 grand out of that, because that's where the market's sitting apparently. So you need to analyze these type of things and to understand them in all forms of business. So I would question this statement, because no, I don't think this is the only. Sure, they prefer that they are solvent, but I'd prefer that they don't get to that point in the first place. And then maybe if you're going to a bank that offers you a higher return on your investment, but is riskier, That's fine. That's fine. Let the consumers make the choice, but provide them with the information. The problem is, we're not getting all the information, are we? So governments also would prefer not to let financial institutions fail, because large-scale bankruptcy could increase the likelihood of systematic problems for the market. Well, these risks are why bailouts were used in the 2008 financial crisis, and the concept of too big to fail led to widespread reform. Well, the problem is the whole situation was set up by the banks guaranteeing, or the government guaranteeing loans. So the whole risk-to-reward ratio, the risk management strategies that a sensible bank would have put in place went out the window because it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Fundamentally, that's my understanding of it. And then it just blew up from there. So that's the problem. If you have essentially risk-free, an environment which is risk-free, where you'll always be bailed out, where your parents are always taking care of you, what do you get? What's the generation that we're getting now? We're getting kids at universities crying. We're getting people wanting safe spaces. Safe spaces. There's a video doing the rounds at the moment on Facebook about a socialist conference. A socialist conference looking at I don't know, points of personal privilege. It's ludicrous. I'm not going to bring it up because, frankly, I can't bother giving it more airtime. But, I mean, is this where we're at with the banks? Is that an analogy to draw? The banks have been too hampered? Too mollycoddled by the monetists? What do you reckon? Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. So, key takeaways. A bail-in provides relief to a financial institution on the brink of failure by requiring the cancellation of debts owed to creditors and depositors. Wow, I wish I could do that. I wish I could just cancel my, the money I owe to people, business associates. What's that called when you do that? What's that process? Can someone remind me? I think it's called going bankrupt, or actually trading insolvent is illegal. At least that's what I have to do every year I sign a piece of paper. Bail-ins and bailouts are both resolution schemes used in distressed situations. Bailouts help to keep creditors from losing, while bail-ins mandate creditors to take losses. I think everyone loses in either one of these situations. Honestly, whatever happens in the end, you all lose. You all lose. Bail-in schemes are being more broadly considered across the globe as a first phase resolution to help mitigate the number of taxpayers' funds used in supporting distressed entities. So you're going to hurt the people who are probably saving and planning for their future. So you can understand why people are concerned that they're limiting crash transactions to $10,000, because that'll just limit day-to-day business in regards, and it also means that it'll lock businesses into this system, into the banking system, where if there's a bail-in, what could happen? There's a greater level of risk. This legislation complying with the other is a greater level of risk. And people can say, oh no, but we've got processes in place. And I'll look at that in a later episode. We'll actually go through the Senate Review Committee on the legislation that came into Australia. Because, your deposits apparently aren't at risk, but self-managed super fund cash is at risk. So we'll go through that in another episode and look at the implications here in Australia. But just the problem is what happens down the road. What happens down the road, what potential it creates. So we'll get back to this and look at bail-ins across the globe. While most investors are familiar with bailouts and their uses, bail-ins are also a stratagem of economists. I think only certain type of economists. I wouldn't say all economists. They should start defining which ones. Probably Keynesians and moneyists and all those bastards. Anyway, Europe has incorporated them to solve many of its greatest challenges. Europe hasn't even solved its greatest challenge. The European Union is on the verge of collapsing, isn't it? If England wants to pull out, how many other countries are pulling out? They're ignoring referendums from people. It's ludicrous. The Bank of International Settlement has also spoken openly about how bail-ins can be used with a focus on integrations in the European Union. Oh, wow. In these scenarios, as is typical for bail-ins, the stratagem is used in cases where a full government bailout is unlikely. Generally, bail-ins are instituted because A financial institution's collapse is not likely to create a systematic problem and lacks too big to fail consequences. B, the government does not possess the financial resources necessary for a bailout. or C, the resolution framework requires that a bail-in be used to mitigate the number of taxpayer funds allocated. Can you just... yeah. So let's look at some real-world examples. And in Cyprus, this happened over a decade ago now. I remember hearing about this in the news, and I just thought, wait, that seems really unfair that they had a bail-in. So Cyprus and European resolutions provide two examples of bail-ins in action. The Cyprus Experiment. While the general public became familiar with the subject of bailouts in the aftermath of the Great Recession of 2008, bail-ins attracted attention in 2013 after government officials resorted to the strategy in Cyprus. As discussed in the National Herald, and we'll go through that, the consequences were that uninsured depositors, defined in the European Union as people with deposits larger than 100,000 euros in the Bank of Cyprus, lost a substantial portion of their deposits. In return, the depositors received bank stock. Bank stock. So stock in a bank that was bankrupt. Bust. However, the value of these stocks did not equate to most depositors' losses. Does that seem fair to you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments. So, European Union. In 2018, the European Union is also looking at more broadly incorporating bail-ins into its resolution framework. In a speech to the IADIC ERC International Conference, Fernando Restoy from the Bank of International Settlements discussed the bail-in plans. In the European Union, a new resolution framework is being considered that will potentially incorporate both bail-ins and bailouts. Bail-ins will be involved in the first phase of a resolution, requiring a specified amount of funds to be written off before bailout funds would become available. There you go. There you go. Does that sound fair, guys? Does it? I mean, come on. Come on. Maybe the Bank of International BIS needs to take a portion of all of their profit revenue and set it aside to allow for this before, average people lose their money. Because you know what will happen? Everyone of any wealth will transfer out of the system and go to banks that are not at risk of this. So let's have a look at the article that they mentioned from the National Herald. And this is Greeks suing Cyprus for lost millions in bank bail-in. And this is from the 25th of May 2018, but I thought we'd read it. Ignore his double head. That's just the process I used to capture the data. So New York. So the Cypriot bank bail-in of 2013 has led to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Oliver A. Hezen, PhD, a director of the law firm Grant and Eisenhoff, is the lead attorney on the case against Cyprus on behalf of Greek citizens who were customers of Lucky, or Bank of Cyprus, or both. He spoke with the National Herald about the case, noting that total claims is for 307 million euro. Damn, which includes interest. He said, as you know, the Cypriot bail in 2013 was a historic measure that wiped out life savings, college funds, pensions of thousands of Greek middle-class people. It has found no parallel in other rescue programs in other countries anywhere, especially the part where depositors lost all or half of their money. All or half of their money. All or half of their money. I mean, this is the middle class going to even exist in the future? Feels like it isn't. Feels like it isn't. I've got absolutely no research to base that on, but feels like it isn't. The reason this was done, the way it was done, was to shift the burden away from Cypriots and the Cypriot state onto foreigners, which is illegal under international law. So, foreign citizen. Besides the haircut itself, there are other elements of the bail-in plan which involve placing an excessive burden on a healthy bank, the Bank of Cyprus, to ensure the other banks, Lakers, debt to the government will be repaid, and to avoid placing burden on the Cypriot state. These measures involved billions and resulted in Greek depositors and bondholders paying an even higher bill. We argue, so one bank goes down, the other one has to, We argue that the measures were discriminatory and arbitrary, expropriatory, unnecessary and disproportionate. Hazen added that Cyprus has now admitted its guilt 3 times. In an email to the International Monetary Fund, it admits that expropriating non-residents violates international law. So there you go. So they took foreigners' money. In a letter to the Cyprus Bar Association, Cyprus Central Bank admitted that a haircut on depositors violates the Cypriot constitution and international law. So here we have a historical precedent where they broke the law, their own laws, their own constitution, and we're supposed to believe our own senators, our own politicians, when they say, oh, it'll be fine, we've got all these rules in place. Are we? Should we? I don't think so. Not in 100 years. Remember, guys, the payroll tax that's getting paid here in Queensland by businesses, that was an emergency measure for the war. How long has that war been over? I wonder. And in 2012, government position paper, it admits that bondholders should be compensated and that it is unfair to let bondholders bear the burden of the government's wrong decisions. But Cyprus has never paid any compensation to Greek citizens who trusted Cyprus and its banks. TNH spoke with Greek citizens who are part of the lawsuit. Mr. KP, sorry. Ionosis Klaukinus, I should know this. Ionosis Vamvakaris and his wife Maria Sinolius in Athens. So all the Greeks watching, I am sorry. And that, well, you know, it's Australia, so there's a lot of Greeks here in Melbourne. Good coffee. Good coffee. I get all my herbs we get from a Greek restaurant. So, asked by TNH about how he got involved with the lawsuit, Mr. Panagiotopoulos said that Lucky Bank stole his and his wife's money. He told TNH, at the time they stole our money, I happened to go on the internet and by chance found a lawyer, Mr. Krikopoulos, through his website. I then telephoned him and Mr. Krikopoulos informed us about a meeting that would be held at a hotel by a New York lawyer on our subject. So I and many others have been informed about the theft, because it was a theft for us since they took away 90% of our capital. 90%. But don't worry, guys, it's not a problem. What's the big deal about, you know, even having portions of this legislation in Australia? What's the big deal? Let the banks just risk all your money. Let them do it. I mean, come on. Trust the politicians. Trust them. Trust them. The American lawyer informed us that we also have a right to appeal on the basis of the transnational agreement between Greece and Cyprus, and indeed with much hope for justice. That was how my wife and I got started since we'd had a joint account. He noted that he suspected something at first, that there were financial problems in Cyprus. I called the bank's manager in Cyprus and he told us not to worry, that there's no problem. Then the Central Bank of Cyprus governor came out telling the world that there was no problem until we woke up one morning and they'd taken our 1 million euros. So their central bank governor said there's no problem. So we have to believe Governor Philip Lowe when he's telling us all these things, that we've got a reasonable economy and, you know, all the growth hopes that he has. Honestly, I just think it comes down to the fact that you've got economists and bankers trying to manipulate an emergent situation. As I said before, it's like a mad scientist in a retro movie trying to control the weather by pulling levers on a screen. They left us a little to pay for hospitals because the whole situation made us sick. I mean, that's terrible. We sent the money with 3 remittances to Lucky Cyprus because we were afraid that we would be bankrupt in Greece. Since then, there have been many judges and prosecutors who have wondered about the loan that were never collected and how they were forced to take our money. I think it was a premeditated and organized theft, he said. Asked if he has reasonable hopes of receiving compensation, he told TNH that we depositors will have justice. I believe that the American lawyer did not come to Athens to waste his time. Otherwise, my wife and I would go along with about 20 others to file a lawsuit in the United States for the mockery of this theft. Civil engineer Ionis Klaukinus told TNH, with regards to the lawsuit, I was informed through a TV program, and if I remember well, through an interview in a newspaper about the case. I must inform you that the losses of my invested capital initially amounted to 1.5 million in euro, was significant, and with the current situation, even more so. So people are losing their life savings. They are losing their life savings. I note that the above bond was replaced with a bond of reduced value, 1.1, but with high collateral, and this just before the collapse. This has decisively influenced my life both physically and psychologically, because part of it was for retirement and medical care. Another part was intended to complete a residential complex, which remains half finished with total appreciation of its value. And finally, part of it was intended to settle debts to third parties who participated in the building program. So he's been building and he's gotten screwed over now. Consequently, above all, the deterioration in my quality of life and the ongoing anxiety, insecurity and uncertainty for the rest of my life has had impact on my health and has serious implications for someone of my age. At 74. 74. Can you see this happening in Australia, guys? Let me know in the comments if I'm overreacting. If I'm overreacting. Do you think they saw it happening? If the case is successful, I estimate that my psychological state will immediately improve and a positive effect on my health and treatment with fewer medications. I'll take care of my financial commitments to my old associates to restore the faith they had in me. The unfinished and devalued residential complex will be completed with the aim of delivering it and relieving me of the economic burden in which this activity took place. A family balance will also be restored for my wife, children and grandchildren. Wow. Finally, Kolinka said, there will be a great deal of satisfaction in seeing justice done for the ruined investors and the law firm which has taken on the case as well. So, I mean, I think that's enough to give us an understanding. Oh no, I'll finish it off. Finally, Konikona said, there was a great deal of satisfaction. Yeah, we've already read that. Ioannis Vamvakaris and my wife Maria Sinolis are managers of the late Anastol Vayakamas AV and his widow Despania, who are now almost in a vegetative state after a severe stroke following what happened to them. Bloody hell. Mr. V and Miss S spoke about the deceased's bank account, which they say were purposely cut. They said that the managers of the Marnef Bank constantly pestered the elderly Anastolis Vikoris to transfer over 1.2 million euros in deposits to Laika for more security than Greece could offer at the time, noting that everyone was afraid in 2010. The money was his entire life savings, they told TNH. So his entire life savings, another one, and then he's suffering a stroke after it. We had the funds at Marfin in term deposits, and in 2010 executives of the bank's management began contacting us to transfer money to Cyprus for safety, and with a very good interest rate. In fact, there was pressure and some persuasion, as we were terrified of the situation in Greece. You cannot imagine what brainwashing they did to the deceased. We were overwhelmed by Marfin telling us that Laiki was one of the safest banks in the world. They said nothing that, again, the deceased was trying to tell them that he wanted to transfer money to foreign banks abroad, not to Cyprus. But those who called him from Marif insisted that their money in Cyprus would be guaranteed, and everything, and eventually they agreed. IV, an entrepreneur, was travelling abroad at the time and became involved too late. In fact, when he and his pregnant wife went to Nicosia in May 2013, Laikai's manager and the Minister for Finance of Cyprus treated them rudely. They behaved in a disgraceful way, said MV. And after wasting hours, a guard appeared and told them to leave because they would call the police. The deposits were 1.2 million, but with the interest, we would have paid off other debts. Add to that the debt that could not be paid after the savings of my entire lifetime was lost. So we've had health problems, psychological issues. Our creditors were chasing my wife, miscarriage, and she can no longer bear child since she is not in her 20s. And AV passed away from sorrow in 2017 at age 90. We found ourselves completely hung out to dry. The couple was informed about the lawsuit through their representatives in Greece and, of course, have related their story in detail to the lawyers on the case. Finally, when asked how they would feel about receiving justice, they said, we can continue our lives. If we do not receive justice, we will not want our lives, because it was unjust and what they did by treading on human souls. One of the most successful plaintiff advocacy firms across the globe, G&E often leads in breaking new ground for investigators throughout the world. The firm concentrates on complex financial litigation and arbitration matters, representing clients in areas such as securities, M&A, corporate governance, asset recovery, appraisal, antitrust, bankruptcy, false claims, consumer protection, intellectual property, and litigation. So I know that was a long one to go through, a lot longer than I thought, but I think it was invaluable to see the human impact this type of stuff can have. The human impact this type of stuff can have. Can you imagine an elderly Australian who set up a self-managed super fund and just has their cash sitting there in a bank and getting a pension out of it and then losing 90% of it like some of these Greek people do? Can you imagine that? Don't worry, Florian, it won't happen. We've got all these rules in place. There's legislations in place, just like Cyprus has. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. And we'll go through what our Senate Review Committee looked at about this in Australia a bit later. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.